So the ShengShou magnetic clock has several features that make it stand out, and with it being the first mass-produced clock in years, should people actually purchase it? In this video, I'm going to be sharing some of the pros and cons of the ShengShou magnetic clock to hopefully help you guys decide whether or not it's worth the look for you. Just to provide some context with my experience in clock, I'm nowhere near the top level. I basically average around 11 seconds or so. Therefore, I may not be able to provide some of the info that others who are faster at the event may be able to. Still, I hope that you guys find this video helpful. Let's start with some of the pros of this puzzle. It comes stock magnetic for only $10, which already gives it an edge over the only other mass-produced widely available clock, the Slynk. Just the fact that the price is basically the same, actually the ShengShou is $1 less, already puts it over the much older Lingao. In addition to that, the ShengShou clock is magnetic, whereas the Lingao does not have a stock magnetic version. These magnets play a huge part in the potential of the clock and really raise the ceiling for peak performance. They ensure a more tactile, snappy feeling of the pins for the clock. Also, one thing that is mostly just super convenient but doesn't really play a part in the performance is the fact that the clock is held together by screws. Although this doesn't affect the performance, this easier to take apart design makes achieving a desirable setup for the clock much more accessible, especially for those who have limited experience with the event or even someone who has never touched a clock before. Finally, this is more of a feature that I just noticed and something that I consider a pro, mostly just because it doesn't really downgrade the clock in any way. This feature is the slight indents in the casing around the turning gears as well as on the sides of the clock where you would be placing it on the surface before starting to solve. I suppose the intention of these indents is to make the turning easier as well as prevent the clock from tipping over respectively. So just looking at the basic features, this clock seems to be the clear purchase of choice over the Lingao, which personally I do think it is, but I'll elaborate more on why in a bit. One of the obvious downsides to this clock is that it is pretty awful out of the box, and requires at least some setup in order to be usable. However, this is pretty much negated by the fact that the same is true for the Lingao, of course excluding occasions where one might be purchasing a custom, already set up clock from another person. For the sake of this video, I will only be taking into account the mass-produced versions that are currently available on the biggest popular cube stores, i.e. the Cubicle and Speedcube Shop, and others of course. If I were to take into account custom clocks, then I believe the common consensus among cubers is that a magnetized and set up Lingao is preferred to the ShengShou, but the price of these custom Lingaos is also much higher than the price of both stock versions of the puzzles. One thing that may be a case-by-case basis, but seems to be the common trend, is that the turning of the gears on the ShengShou clock are slightly less defined than on the Lingao. This mostly affects the consistency of the solves and turns on the puzzle, and can result in turns that aren't completed fully, which means that the pins won't be able to move and basically derails the solve in most cases. While I don't find this happening to myself an overwhelming amount of times, it does come up as a problem every once in a while when I slightly lose focus during my solves. My last small complaint with this clock is that the pins are slightly shorter than on the Lingao. I suppose this can be seen as both a positive and a negative, but I personally prefer longer pins, partly for recognition purposes. Also, I'm assuming that this is specific with my clock, but one of the pins on my clock sticks out slightly more than the others when pressed down, which I find to be kind of annoying. Now, after going over many of the key features and aspects of this clock, I hope you're able to gain some knowledge in order to make an educated decision and possibly purchase. If you're going to ask me if you should purchase this, I do think it is more worth it compared to the Lingao in most cases. If you already have a magnetic Lingao that is properly set up and you enjoy it, I would personally say to stick with that clock for the time being. However, if you don't have a clock or have a mediocre non-magnetic Lingao, then I can recommend this clock to you as long as you're willing to do the proper setup. The reason I don't recommend choosing a custom magnetic Lingao over the ShengShou, if you don't already have one, is purely due to the price difference. A custom setup and magnetized Lingao can be around 3 or 4 times the price of the ShengShou if I'm not mistaken. But if you are willing to pay that price, then I would say that the objective performance of a fully set up and magnetized Lingao clock is probably better than that of the ShengShou. Also, there is a cheaty clock that is said to be released sometime in the near future, and for all I know that could completely take over the clock market. For the record, that clock has not been released at the time of making this video, and I haven't heard of any prototypes going out or anything. So I guess take that into consideration if you're for some reason watching this video after the cheaty clock has been released. That's basically it for this video. I hope you're able to learn something useful or simply just enjoyed watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share this video for more content in the future. Thanks for watching, and until next time.